Hello everyone, this is the first of two video lectures for chapters 4 and 5 on the benefits and risks and then the physiological differences between female and male athletes. The first thing we're going to talk about is benefit and risks of participation in sports and athletics and a healthy physical lifestyle for girls and women. And then in the next lecture, I'll talk about the physiological differences between men and women and why we split genders when we talk about sport competition and why that is smart and how that does create differences in male and female performances. And of course, understanding why different isn't bad. Different is just different. So we're going to start with the benefits and risks of participation by girls and women in sport. And all the studies show, of course, since the turn of the last century, when we were refuting those statistics or those scientific, quote-unquote scientific studies that were demonstrating how it was bad for women to be physically active, how it was bad for the reproductive system, how they wouldn't be able to have children, how it would damage their bodies, their frail bodies. We know from all the studies done ever since then, time and time again, that a healthy lifestyle for every human is good for everyone for multiple reasons. And we know for girls, for young girls, youth girls, that the more they participate in physical activity and sports at a younger level and can stay engaged in those sports, the more apt they are to have a healthy lifestyle well into their later life. And obviously all the health benefits that come with that. So initially, as youth, when they're being educated in a educational system, there's a clear positive association between high school sport participation and educational outcomes. So we more often than not see that the girls that are involved in sport while they're in elementary school, high school, so interscholastic sport level, that they have a more positive outcome educationally as well. They tend to realize an academic advantage, whether that's just better performances on tests, they're more efficient and they get their work done quicker. They do a better job overall on their homework assignments. They aren't tardy. All of those things that we want to see in a positive educational environment, we see happen at a higher rate and a more consistent basis for girls than we do when they're involved in sport than when they're not. Also, there's a clear connection between involvement and success in math and science for females when they're involved in sport participation, and also the higher test scores in STEM areas altogether. And then we also see where we have schools with a 1-to-1 ratio between male and female athletes, that there tends to be a higher percentage of female athletes in AP science courses. This is something that they have found through research, that when we see an equal number of boys and girls in athletics participating in sport, that we have a higher percentage of females in those schools that have that ratio of 1-to-1 in AP science courses. So we see an interesting connection between girls who are maybe have more conviction, more confidence to get into STEM areas, and not only to get into STEM areas alongside of their male counterparts, but also perform better in math and science and other STEM related topics. Also, regular physical exercise and diet can significantly reduce the risk of future health issues. So what we see, again, when young girls get involved in sport and understand what an active, healthy lifestyle looks like, and then continue that through their youth and up into their young adult life and then into their later adult life, we see a clear, significant reduction in multiple health issues. One is heart disease in women. We also see a clear drop in risk of any kind of cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, any kind of all-cause mortality. We see a drop in anywhere between 20 and 35% decrease or lower risk of those types of diseases. And then, excuse me, and then, of course, what I already just talked about was the health or the heart disease issue. Now, an interesting note about this is that women of color do not have as much access to sport as white women, and certainly that opportunity decreases even more significantly the lower socioeconomic environment that they live in. So we, because of that, then of course, if they don't have access to sport, then they don't get involved in those active, healthy lifestyles, and they're not continuing to take care of themselves in a healthy way later into life. So what we see, and this is why we see that women of color are at a higher risk of heart disease than any other category of women. And it is because way back when we start at the youth level, women of color, girls of color, have a lesser opportunity to get involved in sport. There's less opportunity made for them. It's more expensive. They have a harder time accessing it. Even if they do have an opportunity to play sport, they have a hard time getting to their sport opportunity for transportation reasons or unreliable guardians that don't make that a priority. And so for all those reasons, women of color don't have as much access to sport as white women. And so they don't get the health benefits that their white counterparts get from participation in sport. And so we do see that women of color are most vulnerable to coronary heart disease, are at a higher risk of all the other sort of diseases that can occur when you don't have a healthy lifestyle. So this is why it is so incredibly important, and it's imperative that we make sport accessible to everyone, no matter what their socioeconomic status, no matter what their race, gender, ethnic background, because we know the lifelong benefits health-wise for them. And the earlier we can get them connected to sport and understanding an active, healthy lifestyle, the more likely it is for them to continue that and to receive the benefits of health benefits long into their life. So other benefits we just see from like moderate levels of exercise. So we're not even talking about rigorous exercise. We're not talking about staying competitively active late into life, but we're talking about even moderate levels of exercise are also associated with many benefits for women. Some of which that your book talks about and that I put in your PowerPoint lecture is that you can retain mental acuity and alleviate symptoms that come with dementia, which is obviously critically important. So you can be mentally acute long into life. Maintain strong bones, so obviously the decreased risk of osteoporosis. Maintain healthy body weight, and core strength that affects balance and movement, so lesser chance of falling down and breaking bones. Having any kind of physical setback from not being able to maintain your balance or manage your body movement well. And then you can combat any kind of acquisition of diseases associated with sedentary lifestyles, so diabetes, sleep disorders, any of those kind of health issues that happen when you have a more sedentary lifestyle obviously are decreased. The chances of those are much more decreased when you have even moderate levels of exercise. So the fact of the matter is that all kind of health benefits come along with an active and healthy lifestyle. And we're not just talking about exercise, of course. We are also talking about diet, sleep, general nutrition. But it is important that we have that base of exercise or activity levels that help us maintain that type of health benefit along with it. So, another thing I want to talk about is mental health issues, sort of mental toughness, and then the issue of depression that we see emerging kind of tenfold among female athletes and athletes in general, but obviously we're focused on female athletes. there's sort of four dimensions of mental toughness. There's hope, optimism, perseverance, and resilience, right? So when we talk about athletes that are mentally tough, they are able to stay focused, and they just overcome any kind of obstacle, and they are we say, like, they have ice in their veins, right? We're talking about someone or people who have these four dimensions of mental toughness. Their hope is that they believe in the ability to achieve. They have that hope that they have the ability to achieve. Their optimism is in that they believe good things will happen. They know good things will happen. Their perseverance is, if it doesn't work the first time, they try it again. Or if something messes up or a game strategy doesn't work, they go for it again. They try it again. They just keep working at it. And the resilience, of course, is adapting to changes. If something happens that they're not ready for, they figure out another way to attack it. And so this is what we see in athletes that are mentally tough, tend to have these four dimensions: the hope, the optimism, the resiliency, and the perseverance. And so we often see the most successful athletes tend to exhibit a high level of mental toughness. They tend to be able to have all four of these dimensions of mental toughness that help them to be as successful as they are. They sort of always see how they can achieve and be very successful in a competitive environment. Well, so what we tend to see is that athletes with a high level of vigor, along with low levels of anger, athletes that have high level of vigor tend to have low levels of anger, depression, tension, fatigue, confusion, all those kind of negative mental capacities. So what we start to see is that the pressure from high level training, the pressure from having to succeed in terms of winning in high stakes situations, and whatnot. Those types of environments put athletes in a risk for depression, and put obviously them at a higher risk for depression. And we see that occurrence happening more for women. Women tend to not handle that high intensity pressure as well. Like, this is what the research is showing, is that they don't handle that high intensity pressure as well. And so they're at a higher risk. Female athletes are at a higher risk for depression in those high intense consistently pressure packed situations than their male counterparts. And so we have a growing awareness of depression in athletes, and that it may be severely underreported because, of course, as much as we are passionate and try to be mentally tough about competing at a high level and succeeding, when we don't, we are equally disappointed, frustrated, and upset. And so it's hard for people to ascertain, are they just upset about the competition, or are these characteristics that are emerging that are demonstrating signs of a mental health issue and depression. And so we we want to make sure that we understand what are the factors that contribute to athlete depression, because this is a risk of being involved as an athlete. There is a risk of a higher risk of mental health issue, because it is such a high level intensity in training, pressure, stress induced environment, that we do see that there's a higher level risk of mental health issue for female athletes. So the factors that contribute to athlete depression are the time demands of sport, the expense of sport, having to keep up with all of the most recent training gear, the swag, paying for trainers, paying for the travel, all of it, like the whole expense in youth sport. And then as you get older into more, higher or maybe even elite levels, the expense of having to continue to train to stay up competitively and be successful is immense. It's really challenging. The stress of keeping up your training and competing consistently, that can contribute to depression. The looming prospect of having to retire from your sport, because it comes to an end for every single athlete. competitive sport ends. You will retire from your sport at some point, whether that's when you're a youth in high school and you finish your high school playing days and that's your retirement time. You play through college. If you're lucky enough to play past college and you play at an elite level, every athlete retires. And so the looming prospect of retirement can create onset depression for some athletes, and then of course injury too. So these are the factors that can contribute to athlete depression. So we want to be aware that those are issues that can contribute to the prospect that female athletes can deal with some depression. And we know from the research and the specific research by Hammond and others that your book cites, that there are statistically females do feel about a quarter of them feel a moderate symptom of depression, a mild to moderate symptom of depression after they compete. So that is a clear sign that we have some risks associated with high level competition and training. The signs, of course, that someone may be depressed are fatigue, change of sleep patterns, poor nutrition habits, a higher incidence of alcohol and drug use, increased isolation, a general lack or loss of energy, and feelings of sadness. And someone doesn't have to have all of those things. They may just exhibit some of those things. They may exhibit some of them more than others. But it is important to realize, and especially in female athletes, it isn't just about someone being sad, and feeling terrible, because a lot of times athletes know how to fake it enough, or again, because they're telling themselves they have to be mentally tough, they figure out how to shift their energy a little bit, that negative or that sad energy a little bit, and figure out how to use it, put it towards their training. So sometimes it may not be just like clear sadness. It could be apathy. They could be very apathetic, not very highly unmotivated. And again, they don't have to have all of those symptoms, but they could have some of those symptoms, but fairly intensely. And again, one of the reasons we see this mental health issue increasing in college level athletes specifically, this is the kind of growing area that we see it becoming more of a trending, more of a problem, or a concern, I should say. The reason we're seeing it so underreported is because it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if someone is actually dealing with a mental health concern, or if they are just dealing with the transitions of a sport and the way that we experience sport, from the highs and the lows to everything in between. So it's becoming difficult to, or it's becoming increasingly a problem or an issue or concern, but it's equally as hard to detect it or to know. So of course, we want to really be aware if we hear an athlete talk about, a teammate or a friend talk about, like sort of suicidal ideations, or thoughts of death, if they talk about that at a more consistent basis, if they seem like they're feeling helpless or hopeless, or having a hard time focusing or concentrating, and you see maybe crying or even more high or levels, kind of heightened levels of anxiety, these are starting to be those signs that are pretty significant to take note of and recognize, like, well, maybe this person is dealing with something more than just general frustration or being upset about a particular event that's happened related to their sport. I'm not identifying these things for you to diagnose. We don't diagnose. That's not what we do. We just recognize maybe if there's concerns and bring them to someone's attention that can help. So while it's really important, and the more informed we are as a community of people, the more informed we are of these potential risks, these potential characteristics that we might see emerge in people, the more we have the ability to help someone, the better. And so that's why I want to make sure we highlight these things. It's important for us to just have general common knowledge about what it looks like for someone to be dealing potentially with a mental health issue, specifically depression, and a lot of times related to, and can be also seen as, anxiety. So you definitely can, if you do see these signs in someone, it's definitely important to try to help them, find the help that can serve them. So if it's their coach, or if it's an athletic trainer, a trusted professor or someone on campus, those are important people to reach out to sort of say, hey, I'm seeing these things happening with a friend of mine or a teammate of mine. Want to make sure we can check in and find out, because we want the benefits of being involved in sport to highly outweigh the risks. And because this is a legitimate risk that we can see as part of participating in sport, we want to minimize that risk as much as possible by being aware and being able to help when we see that there potentially is a problem. The last couple of things I want to talk about is substance abuse. This is also something that's an interesting part of someone involved in a female involved in athletics. A lot of times we see it's very clear that female athletes have a lower use of illicit drugs. Even some of the sort of basic street drugs, or even marijuana, although that one is sort of a little bit of that one's a little bit more like alcohol, and that female athletes tend to use alcohol and marijuana a little more commonly than they would illicit drugs. But it is clear that the more they are involved in sport, females are involved in their sport, the less chance and incident rate of using drugs that is the case. But it is not the case so much for alcohol, and marijuana is starting to show signs of being similar to alcohol, and that even if you are a female involved in sport, you may not have a decreased likelihood of using alcohol and pot. And I think some of this has to do with the culture around being a part of a sport team, and that culture that comes together and you celebrate, and that environment, it creates this idea that when we celebrate, we indulge and we engage in social drinking behaviors. And so I think that contributes a little bit to the higher incidence of female athletes using alcohol than we maybe would suspect, because we would maybe sort of think, I know I always used to think as a coach, like, why do you want to put that in your body, because you will not be able to perform at peak levels. But I think it has something more to do with the social environment that teams create, that sort of encourage the use of alcohol. And I think pot is becoming part of that culture as well. I do think that we see a higher incident rate of alcohol use amongst male athletes than female athletes, but we still see that female athletes do not have a lower use of alcohol and pot than we do sort of the general public. So anyway, we do want to make sure that we are aware that just getting involved in sports doesn't mean females are not going to drink alcohol. They are going to still engage in that kind of behavior, but what does decrease are the use of illicit drugs, and also smoking too. Cigarette smoking definitely has a lower incident rate with females that are part of sport than are not in an active, healthy lifestyle. Sexual risk prevention also is something that is less likely to be engaged in. Certainly less risky sexual behavior is definitely less likely to happen with female athletes, girls that are involved in sport participation. We find, again, because they're part of this community, this tribe, that they talk about their sexual behaviors more openly, but also because of that, they talk more about healthy sexual relationships. So they tend to use protection more often, or they tend to be more safe about how they engage in sexual activities. So we do see that also. So that also means that we see a lower incident rate of teen pregnancy, or early pregnancy, or pregnancy outside of a committed relationship, amongst women who are part of athletics than those that are not. And then the last couple of things are injuries. Female athlete and injuries. We do see a higher incident rate of girls in concussion rate. It's a 1.7 per 10,000 athletes that participate in sport in women, where it's only a 1 to 10,000 ratio in boys. And we see that is more, the concussion rate happens more often, excuse me, in actual game competition than in practice environment. And we know that that probably has to do with the fact that they're not practicing as hard and preparing as well for the competitive environment. And so they're not as quite as ready, right? So they get into the competitive environment, it's a little bit more fierce, and then their bodies aren't ready to handle the contact that they're experiencing in game time, which means we need to prepare our female athletes better for the type of contact that they're going to experience in competition, so they're ready to be able to manage and not be suspect to or victim of a concussion injury. Also, I want to just quickly talk about as well that women also have a higher incident rate, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this when I talk about the physiological differences, but women also have a higher incident rate of ACL injuries, shoulder injuries, foot and ankle injuries, because of their physiology, the way their bodies are built. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next lecture, but that is also another risk of being part of sport, is that you have those higher incident rates of injuries to those particular areas of the body. The last thing I do want to talk about, though, that's a risk for women involved in sport that men cannot experience, is the female athlete triad. Because there's 3 interrelated conditions that can happen to a woman when she experiences the athlete triad that are very concerning. One is disordered eating, the other one is bone loss, and then the last one is amenorrhea, which is not having your period for 90 days or longer. So the absence of your period combined with the lower bone density, so the incident of fracture or broken bones or stress fractures in your bones, and then disordered eating is what we call, if you see those 3 things happening in an athlete, it's what we call the female athlete triad. It's those 3 triad. It's those 3 things happening interrelatedly that we recognize that it means women are not taking care of their bodies, are not training properly, they are depleting their body of the nutrients it needs, minerals and nutrients it needs to be strong and healthy and to be able to compete at peak levels. We see the female athlete triad in the incidence of it happening more in more in sports that tend to be more aesthetic, and where body composition is stressed more often. So like gymnastics, swimming, cross country running. These are the types of sports where we see the higher incident rate of the female athlete triad, and it is very concerning. So if you see a female that seems to have issues with eating, any kind of disordered eating, and she's spoken about the fact that she hasn't had her period for a while, and maybe she gets a stress fracture, she breaks a bone, we might be looking at someone with a female athlete triad, or even 2 of those issues happening means that they're not taking care of their body, and these are obviously things we want to be aware of in our female athletes, that we're not depleting their body of the minerals and nutrients it needs, and that their bodies are staying strong and healthy, so that they can compete well and long into their lives, and their bodies are healthy well long into their lives. So those are that's the overview of the health benefits and risks of female athlete participation. In the next video, we'll talk about the physiological differences between male and female athletes.